Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. And I'm so pleased you can all join us here this evening, both our in-person and online audience, for this special artisan lecture, and which of course is part of our spring lecture series. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York was founded in 1785, 237 years ago, by 22 artisans. And tonight's lecture is an ongoing tribute to those original artisans who founded the General Society. Our 237-year-old organization also includes our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, the John M. Mossman Lock Museum, and our nearly 200-year-old lecture series, of which, of course, tonight's lecture is part of. For our online audience, please feel free to submit typed questions at any point during the lecture. And of course, at the conclusion of the talk, we would ask that you use the Q&A section rather than raise your hand. For our in-person audience, we ask that you keep your questions until the end of the program. It is such a great pleasure for the General Society to welcome back Gregory Dietrich this evening. Gregory is a New York-based architectural historian who is the sole proprietor of Gregory Dietrich Preservation Consulting and an adjunct instructor in NYU's Art History, Urban Design, and Architecture Studies program. In addition, he has served as a guest lecturer, panelist, and tour guide in a range of educational, cultural, and civic institutions, both here and abroad. Mr. Dietrich has presented a number of times at the General Society on a wide range of well-received topics, including his most recent presentation entitled Down the Bridle Path, Exploring the Vestiges of Greenwich Village's Equine Past. Could I ask you to join your hands to welcome Gregory Dietrich? Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for coming. I am thrilled to be here tonight to talk about my father, the Swedish-American Impressionist Dietrich, whose work as an illustrator, etcher, portrait artist, scenic, textile, wallpaper, and serigraph designer, and ultimately fine artist spanned over 60 years. I'm also pleased to announce that there is a collection of his work for sale through the Dietrich family estate. But before I begin, I would like to thank Victoria Dengel and Karen Taylor for having me back, along with Angelo Vigorito for ensuring that I am seen and heard tonight. Oh, and by the way, this particular oil painting of his is entitled Seine View, which I'm sure you know why. And that would be me. You know, growing up in California, I really didn't know a lot about my dad's past. In fact, well, what kid does? But once in a while, he would tell me something that would give me pause, such as the time I came home from a school screening of Disney's Song of the South and learned that he had created the matte drawings for the background scenes of the live action sequences. Or another time when we were talking about Rodgers and Hammerstein, and he said that he had designed a wallpaper that Hammerstein's wife, Dorothy, an interior decorator and designer, had snatched up because it reminded her of her husband's show, Oklahoma. Or when he asked me if I needed any money, And I said, no, to which he responded that the only other person that had ever said that to him was Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, these stories and other anecdotes became the stuff of his memoirs, which he penned between 1996 and 97 as a means of sharing his life story with family and friends. Now, my own interest in this story, beyond the curiosity of a grown son, has been from the perspective of one who does research for a living. Prior to my work as an architectural historian, I worked for a biographer. And although I can't lay claim to having uncovered everything that has been written about my dad, I do feel as if I have a fuller understanding of his life and work now, aided by numerous journals and newspapers that covered him between the 1950s and 1990s. It even bears noting that I found an entry for him in the 1953 edition of the Swedish Dictionary of Art and Artists at Columbia University's Butler Library. Just to be clear, an art reference book written in Swedish, published in 1953, is located in the main reading room of a library literally 2 blocks from where I live. Now, this presentation would not be complete without a family tree. However, since there is so much ground to cover with my father, I'm offering 2 trees. This tree shows his immediate family in Sweden, while this tree shows the multiple families he helped produce and or raise. As we move forward, I'll be touching on nearly everyone in one way or another, so consider this your roadmap. And with that, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge, to thank my mom, Patty, my sister, Ingrid, and to recognize my late Aunt Ami, all of whom supplied me with the photographs that you'll be seeing for the first time tonight. I would also like to acknowledge my brother Tor, who has had a passion for promoting our father's work going back to the 1980s when he began documenting his life and work, to 2003 when he produced the ultimate video tribute on the occasion of his passing, to more recently with his backing and oversight of a website that explores our dad's extraordinary life and career. Tor is both keeper of the collection and a keeper of the flame when it comes to celebrating our father's artistic legacy. Dietrich Hermann Grunewald was born in Oskarshamn, Sweden, to Edward Grunewald, a German textile engineer and a Moravian missionary, and Elizabeth Feldman, a trained vocalist and pianist born to German and English parents. Dietrich, as he was affectionately called, was the second youngest of 5 siblings. From an early age, he developed an appreciation of nature, which was complemented by a love of outdoor sports. However, his childhood was not without incident and suffering as well. After moving to Helsingborg with his family in 1929, he was stricken with polio and rheumatic fever within 2 years, which he miraculously overcame. And I would like to just highlight the fact that this was essentially a German family living in Sweden. Even at an early age, Dietrich was captivated by the foreboding nature of the pine forest behind his house with its vast and mysterious understory. These tangible elements stimulated his curiosity and imagination, eventually awakening his artistic sensibilities and prompting him to study the forest's understory. From there, an early interest in figure drawing led him to explore anatomy, bolstered by books his father had given him containing drawings of the German masters. So the 4 ink drawings that you see on the left were completed when he was 12. And I don't have a date for the anatomical drawing, but I would suspect that it most likely came a little bit later when he was studying anatomy at an art school in Stockholm. While Dietrich's early childhood was focused on satisfying his artistic impulses, his teenage years were focused on the practical necessities of making money. Between 1933 and 1935, he enrolled in a commercial art school in Stockholm, where he furthered his studies of the human figure. By the end of his final year, he had landed a job at a brand new ad agency in the center of Stockholm and was tasked with creating ideas and sketches for ad campaigns and rendering the finished artwork. In addition, he worked freelance, producing illustrations directly for magazine publishers. So unfortunately, I don't have any examples of his commercial design work. However, both of these sets of drawings were done while he was in art school in Stockholm. And this one on the left, which is executed in our charcoal, really to me is sort of evocative of a George Hurrell studio portrait from MGM from the 1930s. Then on the right, these character studies, which look so Scandinavian to me, have been completed in sepia ink. Also note the signature, Dietrich Grunewald. Tragically, everything came to a screeching halt when at the age of 20, a fun-filled weekend at a resort town took an ugly turn. And as my dad had explained it many years later, he had gone to a resort town southeast of Stockholm with two buddies of his. And at the end of the weekend, they were running to catch the last train of the day. They hopped aboard a baggage car. My dad was sitting with his legs dangling outside of the car. And unbeknownst to the three of them, the train was running express and not local. So rather than slow down as it came to the first station, it whizzed right through with my dad's right knee bearing the impact of that platform hitting his leg and was nearly severed. Serendipitously, he was, oops. He was operated on by an orthopedist named Dr. Ivar Palmer. Now, I can't begin to understand, but Dr. Palmer turns out to be a pioneer in knee reconstruction. So in fact, this was right up his alley. And in fact, Dr. Palmer was also working on his first book, and he thought my father would make an excellent case study for the book. So as they were prepping for surgery and my dad was lying in the bed, Dr. Palmer was making slight adjustments to the knee so that he could photograph them better, which of course induced excruciating pain from my dad. And he said every time I would so much as wince, Dr. Palmer would try to calm him and say, "It's for the book, it's for the book." In the aftermath of the accident, he was an invalid at the hospital, 6 hours from the family home where his mother was tending after his siblings, while his father was doing missionary work abroad. Overcome with loneliness, he was consumed with self-doubt about his ability to ever walk again and pursue his dream of becoming a fine artist. As it happened, he had picked up a copy of the Saturday Evening Post while attending art school and had spied a small ad in the back pages of the magazine for the American Academy of Art in Chicago. Laid up in the hospital, he began fantasizing about the prospect of study abroad as a means of reinvigorating his efforts for recovery. After months of excruciating rehabilitation and regaining the ability to walk, he decided to apply to the academy, and after being accepted, boarded a passenger cargo ship in Copenhagen in the spring of 1938, arriving in New York 3 weeks later. And I can only say through the magic of the World Wide Web, was I able to find a brochure for the original passenger cargo ship that my father took to come to the United States, along with this wonderful harbor view of the city from 1938. Shortly after starting class at the Academy of Art, Dietrich realized it was not a good fit for him. In fact, not long after entering the program, he began skipping classes to immerse himself in the galleries of the Art Institute of Chicago. Before the semester had ended, he had decided to leave Chicago and head west, eventually arriving in Los Angeles, where he took some classes in figure drawing and anatomy, later relocating to San Francisco, where he took some classes in etching and dry point, an engraving process which involves a steel needle and a copper plate. While these classes marked the end of his formal art studies, they served as a prelude to a lifetime of artistic exploration, inspired by works of the masters memorialized in art books and showcased in art museums, as well as observations of the world around him and his passion to develop his artistic vision, informed by a rich interplay of color and light through an impressionistic lens. Dietrich's drawings were both a means to an end and an end unto themselves. Both his early and later drawings show the prominent role they played in his ongoing development as a fine artist, as seen in his earliest nature and figure sketches and his later works consisting of stylized portraits and nudes or meticulously detailed streetscapes and factory complexes. Although he had initially come to LA, it was San Francisco that would inspire him. In fact, he called his early time spent in San Francisco the best of times for my graphic productivity and artistically an inspirational period, citing the scattering of artistically intriguing motifs that could be found in and around the city, from the wharfs along the South Bay region to the truck farming communities along the coast, later immortalized in a series of evocative etchings. Diverging widely both in content and style from the vivid and fantastical oil paintings and oils on paper that would come to characterize his later work, these early sketches and drawings provide a rare glimpse into the artist's early development, showing his experimentation with a variety of mediums and subject matter that would ultimately inform his growth and maturation as a fine artist. First, I just wanted to say a word about the photos. Just to set the record straight, my father never painted in a suit and tie. Both of these photos that you see were taken by his first wife, who was a photojournalist for Life magazine. And I'm convinced that this one in the upper right was probably something that they concocted together as a publicity photo. The photo on the lower left, which is him drawing in their apartment on Sutter Avenue, was more his style. This is more typically how you might see him attired when he was working. In terms of the work itself, the nude that you see, I'm pretty sure was done in LA when he returned, because he had talked about classes where they were doing ink drawings of models. Then we have these two etchings. This is one of the truck farming communities that I referred to, a factory complex that goes unnamed, but both of these are in the Bay Area. These two charcoal drawings, this one is entitled Marmion's Corner, which I don't know where that is, but it could very well be downtown LA in the 1930s. And then this other one, which I know he did in San Francisco, which certainly looks awfully Charles Adams to me, New Yorker cartoon. And then finally, another sepia ink drawing that he did in 1938 in LA. Dietrich's introduction to the world of scenic design was the product of two chance encounters. In 1938, he met Charles Lautrup in LA, an esteemed conductor from Denmark, who called him months later to see if he would design the sets for a one-night performance of the Danish national music drama, Elverho, or The Elves' Hill, as part of the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition. Without hesitation or a background in scenic design, Dietrich agreed and suddenly found himself moving from LA to San Francisco to begin research and concept sketches for a production that would garner international attention. He later found himself at the Opera House on the night of the performance, sharing a box with two notable Danish Americans, the Helden tenor, Laurits Melchior, and the veteran Hollywood character actor, Gene Herschelt. Heaping praise for his work on Elverho, they urged him to return to LA to pursue production work in Hollywood. So first, we all know Gene Herschelt's name because of the annual humanitarian award that's given out at the Oscars. Also, I think everyone in this room is familiar with the fact that New York hosted a World's Fair in 1939. But many of you may not know that San Francisco also hosted a World's Fair in 1939, which inaugurated the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge. And the primary site for their World's Fair was Treasure Island, which was a man-made island lying northeast of the Embarcadero. Also, I just wanted to say a few words about the photos. After lots and lots of research, I finally figured out that this was the Fine Arts Building on Treasure Island, which actually was not where the performance was. However, I thought it was kind of great because it did tie in with the fact that he was associated with the event. The event itself was in the War Memorial Opera House, which is still home to the San Francisco Opera at the Civic Center. But that photo is not of the performance. That photo is of the conference that led to the formation of the UN in 1945. And then lastly, I apologize for the poor resolution of the program here, but it was the only graphic I could find that was associated with this original production. And I'm pretty sure that my father designed it. I was able to attain that from an archivist at the Royal Danish Archives, who supplied me with a couple of articles from the time, written in Danish, of course, which I don't speak. Dietrich met his first wife, Natalie Nikolaev Valley, an emigre from St. Petersburg, Russia, in San Francisco in 1940. A self-taught photographer, as I said, she worked as a photojournalist for Life magazine, and clearly delighted in shooting Dietrich in a variety of locations and poses in and around the Bay Area, while he captured these settings and in his drawings and sketches. After she became pregnant, the two married in 1942 and had a daughter later that year who they named Ingrid. As the prospect of employment at the film studios drew Dietrich to Hollywood, Natalie and Ingrid eventually followed. However, their life together in Hollywood was fraught, culminating in Natalie's decision to take her daughter and move to New York. And I think really to look at these photos, Natalie's talent is so palpable in this area. And then also just to say that these photos truly capture the man that I knew as my father many years later. Just very fun-loving, charming, and a real joy for living. Back in Hollywood, Dietrich had gotten a job in the art department at 20th Century Fox, creating storyboards and blueprint projections of scenic sketches to facilitate set construction. His first film projects were musicals starring Betty Grable, featuring Carmen Miranda and Harry James. After Fox, he was hired by Paramount Pictures to create storyboards for the Hemingway classic For Whom the Bell Tolls, starring that other Swede. Just prior to the US entering the Second World War, he received a job offer from automaker turned shipbuilder Henry Kaiser to translate one-dimensional drawings into three-dimensional blueprints for warship construction, similar to his work at the studios. This led him to relocate to Portland, Oregon, to work at the Kaiser shipyard in Vancouver, Washington, and later to another one in Richmond, California. He found the work technically challenging, but unfulfilling. Now, it bears noting that my dad had come to the US initially on a student visa and had looked into the possibility of applying for American citizenship. However, once the US entered the war, his becoming a citizen was contingent on his going to war, which he refused to do. Alternately, he was advised by the Swedish consulate that he could obtain an exemption based on his Swedish citizenship and reapply after the war ended. However, as he learned at the war's conclusion, it was not possible to do so. In 1943, he returned to Hollywood from the Kaiser shipyard in Richmond and began work at Samuel Goldwyn Productions on a Danny Kaye musical called Up in Arms and a Bob Hope comedy called The Princess and the Pirate. This in turn led to his assignment at the Walt Disney Studio and his work on Song of the South. Okay, so I realize that the big elephant in the room is the man sitting in the center of this photo, but that is not who I'm going to be talking about. Dietrich met many people over the course of his lifetime, whose careers intersected with his that led to lasting friendships. Leonard Claremont was one such person. Also hailing from Sweden, Claremont was a world traveler who initially worked as a photographer and a journalist before becoming a director, cinematographer, and author. At the time of their meeting in the early 1940s, he was a journalist covering Swedes working in Hollywood and had built up a sizable network of contacts from his native country. It is perhaps for this reason that he approached Walt Disney in 1946 about serving as the director, translator, and casting director of the Swedish version of the American box office hit, Dumbo. However, unlike the original, which featured a wide range of character actors lending their voices to the cartoon, Claremont's Dumbo was consisting of amateur voices of Swedes working in Hollywood's creative, talent, and production departments. Among them was a scenic designer working in Disney's art department. Dumbo was released in Sweden on September 16, 1946. So this photo, of course, has been apocryphal in my family. And the researcher in me just wanted to do a little bit of validation about the story behind the photo. And sure enough, because this is 2022, there is a blog devoted to foreign releases of Disney animated films, complete with cast lists. And there, my father is listed. He did not have a leading role. Dietrich met his second wife, Maj-Britt Sedvey, in 1947. Maj-Britt had worked as a script supervisor doing continuity in Sweden and come to Hollywood earlier that year to work at the studios. Introduced by a mutual acquaintance, the two became good friends and eventually lovers, culminating in a marriage in 1950 that was ironically championed by his ex-wife, Natalie, as a condition of his seeing Ingrid again. Over the next several years, the couple had two sons, Thomas and Timothy. By the mid-1950s, the couple had grown apart and decided to separate. Maj-Britt then moved back to Sweden with the boys to be closer to family and to resume her work at the studios there. Despite their breakup, the two remained lifelong friends, and Tom and Tim had the experience of getting to know both sides of their family in Sweden during their formative years. And I can only say that having known Maj-Britt as a kid growing up, I had no idea of the breadth of her work, the fact that it spanned two continents, that it was spanning two mediums. I thought actually she worked just in television, but you can see the very early Swedish films up here. And then, I guess for lack of a better word, some B pictures here in Hollywood. And then you've got the television credits, which I think she fits quite squarely into the golden age of television. A studio-wide strike between 1945 and 1946 compelled Dietrich to venture beyond the art departments of Hollywood and explore new ways of generating income. Heeding the suggestion of costume designer Edith Head, he contacted San Francisco-based textile designer and weaver, Dorothy Liebes. He contacted her about the prospect of branching out into wallpaper and textile design. In addition to her success as a designer and weaver, Liebes was also a savvy businesswoman and promoter. After reviewing his sketches and color samples, she invited him to showcase his work that fall to her East Coast buyers at New York City's Gotham Hotel. And today we know the Gotham Hotel is the Peninsula Hotel on 5th and 55th. For the next 2 months, he worked on developing a design portfolio for the showcase, which Liebes would later brand the New California Look. The success of this showcase enabled him to forge a new path in textile and wallpaper design, securing contracts with leading US manufacturers such as Scalamander Silks, Schumacher, Kent Bragaline, and Katzenbach and Warren. Upon his return from New York, he rented a storefront on West 3rd Street in West Hollywood, where he opened Dietrich Studios in 1949, producing textile and wallpaper designs, along with groupings of serigraphs, which he marketed as decorative paintings. So this is my dad in front of his storefront on West 3rd Street in West Hollywood. This color representation of one of his wallpapers I found on the Cooper Hewitt Museum website, which also has two other examples of his wallpaper designs. On the lower left, we have one of his hotel commissions known as Ocean House. And you can see the big trend, of course, during this time of matching the draperies with the wallpaper, as well as the upholstery. Sometimes it was just a full-on sensory experience there. And then the lower two right are showroom photos. But I particularly like this because you get a sense of how it all comes together with the drapery, the wallpaper design, and then the trio of decorative paintings. And these serigraphs he was making himself in his studio there. And then finally, this other photo, which I still scratch my head because it's so anomalous in terms of the work that I know my father to have done, this sort of mid-century modern motif in terms of the wallpaper. In 1949, Dietrich met an entrepreneur from Holland named Werner Rodman, who proposed a partnership whereby the artist would create the designs for serigraphs and monitor production of them, while Rodman, operating under the auspices of the Van Amstel Company, would produce, market, and distribute them. Now, serigraphs are silkscreen prints that are produced through a repetitive process in which each color of the print is laid down through a silk panel to create a composite image on canvas or paper. Over the next 25 years, Dietrich made regular visits to Van Amstel's Culver City factory, where he supervised production of his limited edition serigraphs, which were then sold in department stores across the country, such as Gimbel's, Marshall Field's, May Company, Robinson's, and others. I should say that this is the only photo that I have of him working at Van Amstel, and truly brings up a flood of memories for me, because as a child, I accompanied him to the factory and watched him work. Also, when you go online, if you search Dietrich Grunewald, you will see so many serigraphs of my dad's that are floating around in the cyberspace there. By the late 1950s, Dietrich Studio's evocative wallpaper and textile designs of trees, florals, vines, and regional scenes across America could be found in exclusive residences, such as President Truman's Little White House in Key West, Florida, various US embassies, and the Governor's Palace in Manila, on the luxury liner SS United States, and in some of the country's most popular and exclusive hotels, including the Beverly Hills, St. Francis, Ocean House, Tropicana, Flamingo, and Ambassador. Now, in his early 40s, he could take stock in the notion that he had attained financial stability as an independent designer, while at the same time bemoaning the fact that he had not yet achieved his dream of becoming a fine artist. He resolved to refocus his effort. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any other examples of these institutional and hotel commissions. However, I did come across this series of Marilyn Monroe taken by Ed Feingers at the Ambassador Hotel in 1955. And I can only say that this wallpaper looks awfully similar to the type of designs that he was doing at this time. And I do know for a fact that the Ambassador underwent a substantial renovation at that time. So the jury is still out. A study of Dietrich's early paintings from the late 1930s and early 1940s suggests that he had initially been drawn to the impasto technique, which was so famously perfected by Van Gogh and characterized by thick layers of paint showing the texture of brushstrokes or a palette knife. His experimentation with impasto proved to be temporary, though, as he began exploring other techniques. By the mid-1950s, Dietrich rededicated himself to his goal of becoming a fine artist through a study of the masters and experimentation. He was influenced in particular by the works of Caravaggio, Murillo, and Rembrandt, whose strength lay in their ability to master light and emphasize the enigmatic qualities of shadow known as chiaroscuro. He began experimenting with this technique by scouring and glazing the dark colors to extract the light from the canvas, and described the marble players as a painting rendered in light and dark contrast, which creates an atmosphere that half conceals and half discloses the subjects, heightening the drama. And I would say notably, this was his favorite painting, and that three boys that are in the painting were modeled after his sons, Tim, Tom, and his stepson, Dana. Dietrich recalled two experiences that left a deep impression on him. One, when as a child sitting in his mother's lap, he looked out the window and witnessed the early morning sky flaring up in a brilliant cascade of light. And the other, when he arrived in the Central California Valley in 1938 and was absolutely bedazzled by a field of flowers. He noted that his fascination with light and color, long preserved in his dreams, emerged in a binding theme and permeated his creative endeavors. Seeking to translate these wonders of nature to the canvas, he discovered that spatial depth could only be attained through the luminosity of color and the graduation of light, taking pains not to overwork any individual pigment. He also confessed his love of fantasy imagery as a way of breathing life into his work, the product of, quote, leaps of his imagination. Leaps that could be expressed through solitary nudes, lovers, musicians, sprites, animals, or any combination thereof. In special instances, he worked from photos provided by his patrons to incorporate the faces of their children into these scenes, similar to what he had done with the marble players. And I just want to say that my use of the term flora instead of floral is deliberate. And that is because a lot of these leaps of imagination appear in other settings like fields and meadows and deserts, in addition to flowerscapes. It was around this time that he met Renee Gold-Zutrow, a fashion designer, illustrator, costume supervisor, and artist from West Caldwell, New Jersey, who had studied at the Art Students League of New York. At the time of their meeting in 1958, she was a single mother with a young son named Dana, who she had brought to California after her divorce. Introduced by a mutual friend, Dietrich and Renee bonded over their passion for art. The following year, he bought a studio residence overlooking the ocean in Pacific Palisades and proposed to her. Over the next several years, they had my brother Tor and me. So this is taken on the set of a show called Matinee Theater in Burbank at NBC Studios around, I think it's 1956. This was a publicity photo for an upcoming exhibition of his that appeared in our local paper. So this is my brother Tor. Here's Dana by my mom's side, and me. Here we have her sketching on our back porch. The property was rather unusual because it was situated really at the apex of a canyon in Pacific Palisades. So it was enormously private, but also had, unfortunately you can't see it, but a view of the Pacific as well. And then lastly, I don't know if any of you recognize this gentleman, this man of letters. This is author Henry Miller. So Henry Miller lived in the Palisades during the 1960s. I don't know exactly when he moved there, but Henry Miller liked watching tennis, and my father loved to play tennis. So my father would regularly be at our local park playing tennis, and he immediately recognized Henry Miller sitting and watching the game. And so he went up to him afterward and struck up conversation. And before you knew it, Henry Miller was coming over to the house to look at the paintings. My dad said in later years, he always said to him, "To the master." Which my dad thought that was very flattering coming from Henry Miller. But needless to say that my mom, during the mid-60s, had decided to revisit sculpting. And she asked Henry Miller if she could do a bust of him. And so this was later bronzed and today is at the Henry Miller Memorial Library in Big Sur, California. By the 1960s, Dietrich was not only beginning to find his artistic voice, but also an audience for his art. Most notably, he received commissions to paint murals for 2 office interiors in LA, along with an unexpected phone call. In the summer of 1962, his good friend Billy Tishman contacted him about mounting a one-man exhibition or vernissage of his work. A scion of the Tishman Realty and Construction Company, Tishman was an interior designer who had designed and built a speculative house in Beverly Hills that he had been trying to sell, prompting him to pitch an event that would promote Dietrich's work and sell the house. Thrilled at the prospect, Dietrich began preparing for the multi-day event by producing a variety of new paintings, while Renee designed the invitations and informational materials and organized a hospitality committee. A total of 6,000 invitations went out, including invitations to the former and current presidents of the United States. Leading up to the event, Tishman brought in his interior decorator, Jamie Ballard, to create white linen panels to transform the residence into an elegant indoor-outdoor art gallery. And the photo below shows you the backyard of the house with these white linen panels. And then we have a photo of Jamie Ballard with my dad. Little cross promotion here. We've got the textile along with the fine art. What I also thought was kind of interesting is that there's this sort of wisp of a branch that sort of ties in with the motif for some reason of the textile. And then this great photo, which to me looks like it's right out of Mad Men. But what struck me about the photo in particular was the subject matter of the painting, which also struck me as rather uncharacteristic of the art that I grew up with and knew my father to do, almost bordering on sort of an expressionistic type of figure. Anyway, through a little research, come to find out that there was a phase during the early 1960s where he was drawn to biblical themes and ancient cultures, so women with urns. Approximately 2,000 people attended the opening weekend in June 1963, which featured a day for decorators, interior designers, and architects, and a day for art collectors, friends, society people, and celebrities. Although the Eisenhowers and Kennedys tendered their regrets, celebrity guests included Rosalind Russell, Edward G. Robinson, Jean Crane, Michael Wilding, and Vera Miles. In addition, 2 days were devoted to charity events and 7 days were open to the general public. At the conclusion of the 11-day event, Tishman sold his house and the city of Beverly Hills passed an ordinance prohibiting public art exhibitions at private homes. But more importantly, as the first major exhibition of Dietrich's work, the Tishman showing was a seminal event in his career, effectively establishing him as a fine artist and paving the way for future exhibitions in other parts of the United States, as well as Canada, Hong Kong, Japan, Central America, and Sweden. Tragically, by the fall of that year, Renee began exhibiting signs of mental illness, leading to a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. After undergoing treatment, she would resume her normal behavior at home until paranoia crept back in, creating an uncontrollable and debilitating mental condition that could only be addressed through another round of treatments. And my dad, in talking about this event, which was so important to him, said it was just so ironic because my mom had really thrown herself into the promotion of the event, both her passion and her energy. And he said, and yet on the very first day, she refused to go because she was certain that somebody was going to harm her and my dad. I think what's so interesting too is just how much that is about life, right? So, you know, when you feel like you're up here and yet you've got something down here, and that I see all of these photos of him through a different lens now, understanding the personal turmoil of what was going on with his relationship. happily, she obviously was feeling better on the second day when the celebrities were there. So there she is in this photo with Sonny Tufts, an actor I've never heard of. In August 1965, Dietrich and Renee attended a dinner party where he met Patty Gilbert Hurst, a single mother and loan processor from Beverly Hills. At the time they met, Patty was going through a divorce from her husband, with whom they had a daughter, Krista. Although Dietrich and Patty had immediately felt a connection on that August night in 1965, it would be 8 months before they would see each other again. As the stress of his wife's mental illness dominated his life, he was unable to work and suffered a minor heart attack in early 1966. Heeding the advice of his doctor, he moved out of the house and eventually settled in Mexico for 10 months, while Renee continued living in the Palisades with Dana, Tor, and me. His time away from Renee gave him a chance to recover and to refocus his energies on his art. Later, invigorated by a visit from Patty, the couple imagined the possibility of a future life together. Upon his return from Mexico, he filed for divorce, which was granted in April 1967, and the following month, he and Patty eloped to Reno. After the divorce, Renee moved out of the house and Dietrich moved back in, initiating a new chapter in his life with Patty, Tor, Krista, and myself. Over the years, the house in the Palisades was the site of family gatherings, small and large dinner parties, weddings, backyard art exhibitions, as well as the place where he painted, showed, and sold his work. In 1993, Dietrich and Patty sold their house and moved to La Quinta, California, where he continued painting until the 1990s, while also working on his memoirs. So this family portrait that you see here, when I was a kid, I don't know if maybe it was a little early for blended families, but when kids would ask me what my family situation was, I could only look to the Brady Bunch. And I would say, it's like the father with the sons and the mother with the daughter coming together, somehow forming a family. So that's what I grew up with. Here's just a family gathering, Akemi, Tim's wife, myself, Tom, his then wife, Nancy, my dad, my mom, Patty, Tim, and Krista. Here was a party that was held in the studio of my dad's in celebration of his 50th year coming to the United States with an immigration theme. And here you can see him working in his studio. And I should say that with relatively few exceptions, we were always welcome into the studio. And in fact, when I was coming home from school, I would always enter that door to say hi to him before going to my room. Although there was one exception, and that was when he was on the phone. And then the phone was here, the brushes were here, and the hand was doing this. Go away, go away. Here is one of 2 weddings that was held in our backyards. My sisters, Tim, my brother Tor, my dad, myself, Tom. They were such a fixture on the tennis courts that I had to include a photo of them playing tennis, but this was not our local park where they were most of the time. It's probably taken in Sweden on the clay court. Here he is working on his memoirs. And then finally at the balloon rides in La Quinta, which later became a theme of his work as well. Oils on paper provided Dietrich with the means of experimentation and an exploration of new techniques. By the 1960s, he had already worked in a wide range of mediums that included pencil, charcoal, and ink, while also creating the engravings for etchings and dry point, and the composite layers for serigraphs on silk panels. These activities were fundamental to his growth as a fine artist, enabling him to start with a simple line drawing that could then be enhanced by either a monochromatic palette or a kaleidoscope of colors rendered in oil. In his later years, Dietrich's oils on paper in particular became the focus of his work, perhaps owing to their more manageable scale than his paintings. And he was particularly fascinated by horse anatomy, This goes way back to 1937, where he first felt some sort of interest in this, but later revisited many, many years later when a doctor friend of his who had 3 thoroughbreds invited him to come out and observe them. And that's when he really started digging into this particular subject matter. My dad's passion for art was only equaled by his passion for sports. After arriving in San Francisco, he met Harry the Coach Cowell, who was a regular fixture in Golden Gate Park, dispensing unsolicited advice to tennis players on how to improve their game. Dietrich credited Cowell with teaching him how to play and thereby instilling a lifelong love of the sport. In the ensuing years, he would derive great pleasure from tennis, whether it was from the steady calm he felt from a back and forth rally, the intensity of a singles or a doubles match for fun or for sport, or the satisfaction of coaching his children and watching them grow. Around the same time that he was developing his tennis game, he also resumed playing soccer, a sport from his childhood that was to become a critical part of his rehabilitation following his train accident at the age of 20. Just 5 years later, he was competing in the California State Soccer Championship at the Los Angeles Stadium. By the 1950s, he had returned to another sport of his youth, skiing. Skiing not only offered him endless hours of enjoyment with friends and family as he traversed the slopes of California's burgeoning ski resorts, but also a host of spectacular settings that would inspire his art. Even in the last decade of his life, his love of physical activity could not be contained. After battling an infection that resulted in the amputation of his right leg just above the knee, he continued to get himself in and out of his pool in La Quinta every day for a swim. Beyond sports, in 1994, Dietrich learned that he could potentially become an American citizen by applying to the INS and passing the tests. 3 years later, after having succeeded in doing so, he fulfilled his lifelong dream of being sworn in as an American citizen on October 16, 1997, at the tender age of 80. On May 21st, 2003, he died of congestive heart failure, one day after he and Patty celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. She remained devoted to him to the end. I don't know about you, but I think it's quite remarkable to have been married 4 times and to still celebrate a 36 years of marriage. Dietrich's fine art career was very much by design. During the 1930s, he devised commercial illustrations for an ad agency in Stockholm. In the 1940s, he created production and scenic designs in Hollywood. And in the 1950s, he produced his own line of textile, wallpaper, and serigraph designs in LA. As a notable biographer once said to me, everything that you do today has been informed by what you have done in the past. And certainly, his work in commercial design contributed to his development as a fine artist. That is the never-ending prospect of staring at a blank page or canvas and having to summon his creative impulses to produce something new and original. But Dietrich's career as a fine artist was also by his design, starting with a dream at the age of 14 that he ultimately achieved at the age of 46. Drawn to the beauty and the mystery of nature at an early age, he began his first explorations in drawing, later focusing his development on figures. Not content with academia, he found his own academy in the art books of the masters and the galleries of art museums, and all the while, the countless sketches and drawings that were the product of these studies became critical to his development as a fine artist. Even before securing a place in Southern California's fine art community by the close of 1963, Dietrich had begun to explore a range of subjects over the next 35 years that would be depicted through a harmonious interplay of color, shadow, and light that informed over 2,000 works that were exhibited and sold domestically and abroad, that would include flora fantasies, figures, landscapes, cityscapes, you can tell that San Francisco was a favorite theme. The American West, Central and South American tropics, sailboats, whether it's spinnakers, schooners, sampans, fox hunts. And this is from the collection of my brother Tor, who was insistent that I offer details so you could see the dogs. Sports scenes, which was a period during the late 1980s, early 1990s. And finally, horses. I'd just like to close by saying that my dad did not live in this world when it came to practical matters such as household finances. He came to this country with very little and managed to carve out a life for himself through a passion for his art, unswerving self-discipline, unrelenting optimism, a will to succeed, and the talent to back it up. He also never lost his sense of awe and wonder about nature and the desire to capture it through his work. That even as we can lose ourselves in all of this color and light, it's easy to forget that an artist's life is not always a smooth ride. Years after the fact, Patty told me about one December when the sum total of his income for the month was $16, stemming from a single royalty check for a serigraph. Or as she later put it, as the mom tasked with shopping for 3 kids, the $16 Christmas. As much as I credit my dad with keeping positive through the darkest of times, I can't help but think of all the people in his life who believed in him and supported him in his dream. And in particular, the wives, who understood that even through the worst of times, there was never any question, never any doubt about what he would do next. Paint. Thank you. I would be happy to take any questions.
Gregory, good. That was fantastic. What a wonderful celebration of the life of your father and such a talented man. How incredible and such a fascinating life story that you told so well. So thank you so much. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay.
Gregory, yes, thank you. That was magnificent, really. So I love your father's work. Thank you. So beautiful, so exquisite. And the story of his life and what 36 years of marriage?
That's right.
So, and then to think that doctor, wow, how that changed his life, that he was able to repair his leg. I mean, and a miracle. But I need to know why they put the kibosh on all the art, the art parties after your death.
Yes, right. Okay. So there were a lot of people attending this private commercial event, and that affected the parking in the neighborhood. That was the big deal. So
Too sensitive they were.
you. And this is a comment from our online audience. The photo, Dietrich painting and sketching in Northern California, circa 1940, looks like it could be a Norman Rockwell piece.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe one of the online audience members have their hand up at the moment. Could we ask you to type in your question?
Does your family have any relationship with Marlene Dietrich?
No, and she has much better legs than my dad did. No.
Oh.
Than my father.
Do we have any other questions from the audience here at the moment? So, well, let me ask a question then, Gregory. So you obviously at an early age were so aware of your father's work from those like after school visits and things. Did you yourself have any artistic ability, or did any of your siblings have artistic ability?
So I never went in the direction of drawing or painting, but I was interested in music. So singing, piano, that's what I was doing. And yes, my eldest sister, Ingrid, works in mixed media and in LA. And so she has had showings of her work like in the Silver Lake area.
Right.
Yeah. And then also I'm happy to say that my niece is a graphic designer. And for my last engagement at the Salmagundi Club, she designed the banner that was posted outside of the club.
How fantastic.
Yeah.
How fantastic.
Yeah, but she's
Right.
quite gifted, quite good.
Right.
Yeah.
And did your father often go back to Europe? Did he travel to Sweden? Was his work exhibited in Sweden as well?
Yes, so this was also a complication about the citizenship where he was not allowed to return to the country for a while. I think it was 1965. And he and my mother, Renee, went back to Sweden. I think it had been 17 years since he had been there. And then after that time, he did regularly go back. I want to say at least every 2 years, he would go visit. I have a lot of, well, you already saw the siblings, but there are a lot of cousins in Sweden
Yeah.
that I'm still in touch with. They're terrific.
Wow, but really, what a story! And how many siblings are there all together?
5 of us, and then 1 MIA. I don't know where Dana turned up.
I'd like to say, Gregory, I, by the way, grew up with Dietrich's 4th wife, and I'm part of their family over the many years in California. And your dad would be so proud of you, Gregory.
Oh,
So
it's really
very
nice of you to
proud.
say that. Thank you, Missy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a wonderful and very special comment from our online audience. Thank you, Gregory. Mom says, well done. Love from California, Patty Dietrich. Oh, that's so delightful that
I
she
love
could
you,
watch,
Mom.
right? And let's see. It was, I'm not quite completely sure. Sorry, forgive me. The way.
Did he ever continue wallpaper design? It was so stunning, and it seems like it would be lucrative. And that was from Suzanne.
All right. Yeah. So no, that aspect of his career really sort of ended by the late. Well, what's interesting is that he kept the name Dietrich Studios as a business entity, but Dietrich Studios really sort of morphed into fine art, and then the serigraphs he was doing with Van Amstel. So yeah, it really was not truly the focus that he was aspiring to throughout his life, but it was an important part of his life.
Thank you for the fascinating story. I went to Sweden deliberately to see the Impressionist Anders Zorn. Did your dad ever speak of the great Swedish Impressionists? There were a group of them.
No, he did not.
Oh,
No.
wonderful paintings.
Yeah,
really.
we had a lot of art books in our house, so there may have been, some books on them, but to my knowledge, he had never talked about them.
And incidentally, Zorn the Zorn Museum has the largest repository of Rembrandt's etchings in the world. He collected etchings.
Fantastic.
So another time.
Thank you.
Were there any other artists that may have influenced his work? Would he have talked about any of them, to your knowledge?
Well, yeah, I mean, I touched on Caravaggio, Rembrandt, and Murillo as being specifically. He also
And more modern artists?
I know in his memoirs, he mentioned something about Grandma Moses, but I don't know in what capacity. Because he wasn't a folk artist, as you can see. I mean, very different.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have to say the breadth of your father's talents, not just as a visual artist, but as like has already been outlined, as a commercial artist, was just stunning. He touched so many aspects of the arts and culture in California. It really was incredible to be working for Disney, to be doing wallpaper. It really was just remarkable, his talents in the visual arts.
I thought one thing that was kind of interesting was he talks about this day where he is going to the Gotham Hotel to present his collection as part of Dorothy Lee's fall preview. And he really takes you there as this kind of country boy Swede, clutching his drawings through the concrete canyons of Manhattan on his way to the hotel. And he said at the end, he got a positive response with the buyers. And what was funny about it was they were all asking for a card. And he said, I didn't have a card. So he said, I will call you. Take control of the situation.
Do we have any more questions? Okay.
And then from Donna Hendrickson, who happens to be a General Society member, actually. It sounds like she's inviting you, for another performance. She said, maybe you can sing and play the piano at the GSMT in the future. Okay. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks, Donna.
Absolutely.
All right.
Gregory, I just want to thank you for your generosity in sharing your father's life story with us, because he clearly was the most remarkable man. And I'm certain that he would also be very proud of his remarkable son. So really, thank you so much. It really was to witness your father's vision in so many ways at firsthand. It was an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for speaking here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And Victoria, would you like to?
No, just to thank Gregory. He's such a great friend to the society, and he's really more like family. So from the bottom of our hearts, we really are just so happy that you shared your father with us. So thank you so much. Thank you.
And Gregory, we have a little memento. I know you probably have. Oh, yes. yes, exactly. Your wonderful father photograph. And I believe it's, you mentioned that for anyone who is interested in acquiring some of your father's work, that they can go to www.dietrichstudios.com.
Yes.
So really, that's fantastic.
As well as also an even more fleshed out and epic biography on the
Right.
website as well.
Well, I think we
More
had
photos.
we
yes.
had a pretty good biography.
you.
Oh, thank you, Gregory. And just to, I'm just going to mention, and I appreciate I'm off camera, but I think you can look, the online audience can see Gregory. A couple of the next lectures are coming up, Coney Island Water Dance with photographer Peter Caiaphas, who will discuss his recent book, Coney Island Water Dance, which captures in stunning images the swimmers of Coney Island. And on June the 7th, in the founder's footsteps, landmarks of the American Revolution with Adam Van Doren. Thank you to our in-person audience, who I hope may join us for a glass of wine. And to our online audience, thank you also very much. And we look forward to the day that you can be here to join us in a glass of wine. Thank you so much. Thank you.